הדוברת הראשונה תהיה לאורה קזאס. קזאס, right? אוקיי. אני אעבור לאנגלית, כי גם ההרצאה תהיה באנגלית. לאורה קזאס... כן, אבל אני לא יודע. Laura Kazes is the advisor on organizational development for the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany. She studied European studies and psychology and gained insight into youth work and education through her engagement in the activities of the ZWST and the Jewish community at an early age. In 2015, she began her professional career as coordinator of the newly founded German-Israel Voluntary Service. For the past few years, Laura has also been engaged in Jewish student activism, and since 2017 she has served as the elected Vice President of the European Union of Jewish Students. Her special fields of interest are women's rights and gender equality, as well as interfaith and intercultural alliances. She developed the concept of the first Jewish Women Empowerment Summit in Germany on behalf of the Educational Department of the Central Council of Jews in Germany and the Jewish Student Union in Germany, and that took place in February 2019. So, please.
First of all, I would really like to thank the Baeck Institute and also to the organizers of this conference for this invitation. I do think that even though, or especially because this conference also has a very scientific approach to the early achievement of these pioneers, it is a special honor for us, for the ZWST, for the Central Welfare Board in Germany, of Jews in Germany, to be also represented here and to be able to give you a short insight on what this pioneer work actually still has an influence, in which way it still has an influence nowadays on the work we do every day. And this is something that I would like to try to give you a short insight to. I do think that it's interesting that I won't give you a scientific approach. I will really try to give you a practical perspective on the history of the Central Welfare Board and the influences that Berta Pappenheim and also Leo Baeck. I chose also to give you a short insight on that as well, because I do think that it is these both figures actually made it possible for us to come here in this setting together. So I will try to give you a very brief summary on the influence, especially Berta Pappenheim, but also Leo Baeck had on the organization, the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany, in short, the ZWST, as we know it today had. And in my talk especially, I will try to give you a contemporary perspective on the guiding principle that still leads our organization until today, which is the principle of Zedaka, the Jewish principle of charity, of wealth, rather of charity, but it actually goes beyond the concept of charity as we would know it in other contexts. So, I don't know how many of you know, but the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany was founded in 1917 as an initiative to centralize and professionalize Jewish welfare organizations that to that time were scattered all across the German territory. And of course, and you will all know that these 100 years of history cannot be illustrated as a continuum, as a continuous history like other legacy organizations have in other countries. And over the course of its history, the ZWST had to newly establish, reorganize, and restructure itself over and over. I think its total shutdown by the Nazi regime in 1939, followed by the total destruction, or almost total destruction, of the Jewish community in Germany through the Shoah, will definitely forever be marked as an incomparable horror. And it also has to be said that this community in those days that was destroyed could never be established in the same way. So I will also depict that a bit more in the following. Yet in a way, the story of this still pretty comparably silent organization can no less be described as a story against all odds of history. And those of you attending the conference tomorrow will hear more about the current state of the Central Welfare Board by our Executive Director, Aaron Schuster, that also is here in this room tonight. And he will give you a current perspective on where the Central Welfare Board actually stands today. So, going 2 years back, not a lot, the ZWSD celebrated its 100th anniversary. And oddly, to many members, we realized that to many members of the Jewish community in Germany nowadays, a community that mostly consists of second and third generation post-Shoah survivors from Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, and mostly today immigrants from the former Soviet Union, this 100-year history of the ZWSD that they perceive as a pretty young organization, that it actually has this 100-year history. And to some of them it was surprising what the ZWSD is celebrating 100 years of existence, but in some way it was also an odd reminder to the fact of how discontinuous the history of our community is and was, and on the other hand, what strong sign of resilience that also is, that this organization can celebrate a 100-year anniversary in Germany. So the ZWSD that had existed before the Shoah, or the concept of the ZWSD that had existed before the Shoah, is in a way, very distant to our current community members, and nevertheless we know that figures like Leo Baeck, like Heinz Galinski, Jeanette Wolf, Berthold Simonson, and Max Willner, among many others, were the ones who carried their institutional memory as well as a strong determination to give Jewish life in Germany immediately after the war, if not a future perspective, at least a current one. And that those were the ones that actually made it possible, that knew the ZWSD before the Shoah, carried it into the situation right after the Shoah. And to go a bit back now, when it comes to Berta Pappenheim, Berta Pappenheim among many others laid the grounds for this Jewish social conscience that does not only constitute a self-awareness of the Jewish community as we know it today, but also had a long-lasting influence on the social welfare system of Germany, as many of you will know. So, in a way, how this came across, this legacy that in some way is distant to many of our members, yet is still embodied in the organization as we know it today, is something that I will try to, as short as possible, outline in a way. So, the leading figures of the ZWSD in the establishment of the organization also played an essential role in the establishment of the German welfare state, and later many of them also, I'm sure you will also talk about that, played an influence in the establishment of the social welfare system in Israel. But this is something that I won't talk about. So the way Jakob Segal, who was the first executive director of the ZWSD, described the movement that laid grounds for the foundation of the Central Welfare Board, he described it the following way. And I will read it out because it's a quote. When its forethinkers began to lay the ground for the Jewish social work as we know it today, and we're talking about 70 years ago, Jewish welfare was scattered across Germany, across the German empires into numerous initiatives and organizations without any central reference or coordinating body. This was possible as long as the private sector and philanthropy were potent enough to hold and finance these structures. But their declining capacity became increasingly visible with the changing political landscape in Europe, and along with it the impact of World War I. And waves of migration from the east, as well as growing poverty in the German region, made it increasingly difficult for independent small organizations to operate and to sustain themselves. So And interestingly, and I'm sure this is also something that we will hear from both of you, the deteriorating social situation became especially clear through the needs and demands of women at that time. And it can surely not be seen as a coincidence that the first milestone of women's emancipation in the 20th century with the voting rights also falls into the same period of time. So Berta Pappenheim in a way played a role in both developments, in the centralization of Jewish organizations, of Jewish welfare, of the Jewish welfare system, and of course in the women's rights movement. In a way, she had a key role, and I will try to specifically outline what it meant for the ZVST back then. Today we know, or this is what also some of the historians that we worked with around the 100th anniversary of the ZVST tell us that Berta Pappenheim was less crucial while the Central Welfare Board was established in its structures in the first years, but what she did give was kind of an initial how would you say that in German you would call it an Initialzündung, an initial impulse to rethink the way that Jewish organizations were operated in Germany. And Gudrun Meyerhoff, who also executed several studies about Berta Pappenheim and about the early years of the establishment of the ZVST, describes it basically as with three motives that Berta Pappenheim gained through her work in the field of women's care. So the first motive would be that even though women's issues are always social issues, women are not presented in these kinds of social settings. And from that she derived that women should contribute to all these responsible positions in the Jewish setting. The second motive is that the model of the Jewish Women's Fund that she had a few years before co-founded should be applicable to other organizations as well. They had already restructured with the establishment of the Jewish Women's Fund. They had already created a structure that was in a way that centralized the needs of women, and she claimed that this kind of model could be transferred to a general central organization as well. And the third thing that she claimed is that the modernization of these structures are absolutely necessary in order to be able to meet the demands of the time that were extremely influenced by the situation of the First World War, by migration, and by the deteriorating situation of philanthropy and the way that the welfare system worked in Germany, the Jewish welfare system. So Pappenheim gave the initial impulse to centralize, to organize, to professionalize the Jewish welfare by the example of Jewish women's organizations. But the Jewish welfare, once it was established, the organized Jewish welfare was confronted with its first major challenge. Jewish organized welfare should actively, on the one hand, contribute to social change in the new republic, in the new Weimar Republic, by allocating welfare as a key commitment to the modern state, to its citizens. But at the same time, it could not, and this was something that many Jewish organizations claimed at the time, that it could not, it should not abandon its core Jewish values. And this is something that was very clear to the founding figures of the ZVST and also to other organizations, that the core principles of Jewish welfare had to be implemented in a kind of central organization. And it's interesting to look at how Leo Baeck described Jewish welfare in that way, because he was also, not only because he wrote a lot on this topic and he was of course a leading scholar, but also because he was the last president of the ZVST until the Shoah. So he also played a key role in the organization, and the way he formulated the relationship between Judaism and social care was, Judaism let social care and welfare become the center part of Jewish piousness, meaning Jewish religiosity cannot go without a social commitment, and the Jewish Jewish social commitment cannot go without religiosity. And there are several concepts that we know in Judaism, for example, Zedaka, Gemilut Chasadim, that embody this kind of basic commandments that from a Jewish perspective human beings have on earth towards their peers, towards their next ones. Let me jump a bit so I won't take too much time from the other speakers. So apart from incorporating that kind of essential Jewish value in the organization, what was clear to these figures that were establishing the organization was that this could also, despite rising anti-Semitism, this could also be a gateway into the German society by cooperating and by co-shaping the social welfare system in Germany. There would be a possibility to have a gateway into the society. And until today, Berta Pappenheim in Frankfurt, in the city where the ZWST is located until today, Berta Pappenheim is mostly known for her achievements as a pioneer in social work and also for a women's rights activist. And less people know how much of an influence she had on the foundation of the ZWST. So here again we can see that despite the history that basically extincted the organizations the way they were until the Third Reich, the achievements of Berta Pappenheim and others as social workers are still present in the German understanding, in German science, and in the social conscience. So that is something that, in a way, to us nowadays, give us also credibility in the organizations that we work with today. But of course, the ZWST had a period where they really organized their structures, but this, and you will know, lasted very shortly, because the ZWST had basically 20 years until it was a bit more than 20 years, from 1917 until 1939, until it was officially shut down by the German government and restructured into an organization that had to report to the Third Reich. There was still a kind of institution that took care of the basic needs of the Jews, but this was basically only to facilitate the machinery of the Third Reich and to organize also the overview of the Jewish people still remaining in the organization, but in Nazi Germany. But what is still also a very big topic to us today is that Leo Baeck, as last president of the ZWST, constituted that the ZWST, or that the aim of the ZWST, should be a community of principles. Principles built on social work as we understand it in a social setting, but also the principles of Judaism. And the extent to which he and other workers also, in a way, obeyed this principle, this idea of a community of principles, is the fact that we know today that basically the social workers that were employed for the ZWST still worked past the official shutdown. So they basically worked until, Leo Baeck called it once, until the last minyan, until the last workers of the ZWST were actually deported. And only, I will jump a bit again. Perfect. So I will go over now to the situation post-war. So I was talking about the conscience and the institutional memory that some of the survivors still had of this organization. And among Leo Baeck there were several others that still knew that still had that institutional memory that a central organization is the one that is needed in order to meet basic needs. So what were the basic needs after the war in Germany? There were displaced persons camps of people, not mostly German, but mainly people that were from Poland, that stranded in Germany and that had no intention of staying on the grounds of the perpetrators. And but still, there was a real basic need in social work and trauma work, as we would call it today, that had to be taken care of. So in 1951, the Central Council that had just been newly founded, the Central Council of Jews in Germany, appointed Berthold Simonson, an Auschwitz survivor who knew the ZVST before the war, appointed him in a one-man operation to rebuild the ZVST, and he was actually one of the crucial people who was able to claim restitution for people, for Jewish people after the war, for people and institutions as well. And against all odds, like the people that had stranded in Germany, many of them left, many of them immigrated to the newly founded State of Israel, and others immigrated to the US. But a small group of around 20 to 30,000 Jews stayed in Germany, and they started to re-establish communities on the grounds of something that wasn't their history, but in a way the children were growing up in this country, and it was a prosperous time. It was not really, in a way, it was an interesting situation between living in Nazi Germany and being in a US sector. So in a way, this kind of transit zone was extended. And the ZVST as an organization facilitated the needs that these people had. So with the growing Jewish communities and with also prospering Jewish communities in a situation where the economic situation of Germany flourished, the ZVST somehow grew. And with it, always the conscience that Zedaka is something that needs to guide this community of principles. And at the same time, only shortly after that, the ZVST was retaken into today it's called Bundesarbeitsgemeinschaft der freien Wohlfahrtspflege, the association of the the 6 top welfare organizations in Germany. An association that under another name, the ZVST had already been part of before the war. So, against all odds, the community consisted of around 30 people. At the end of the 80s, early 90s, the fall of the Iron Curtain brought the ZVST to a completely new challenge. Integrating round about the sixfold of the population, not only into the from the former Soviet Union, not only into the Jewish community, but also into German society. And also, in this situation, the crucial idea was that they had to, on the one hand, give people an idea of what Jewish values mean and of what a Jewish community consists, and on the other hand, in which way to facilitate the integration of those people coming from the former Soviet Union into German society. And I would also like to say, that this was the major achievement of the former director of the ZVST, Benny Bloch, who only passed away recently. This kind of giant task that the small organization had to achieve, I would claim that parts of this is due to the fact that the ZVST has these two guiding principles. On the one hand, being strongly rooted in a Jewish principle, in the Jewish principle of Zedaka, and on the other hand, being established in the context and in the structures of the German welfare system. And I would like to end with a quote that, in the face of the 100th anniversary, the historian Michael Brenner wrote about the ZVST. He basically, what he said was, the history of German Jewry now is written in a narrative oftentimes that what was extincted was a Jewish society of intellectuals, of an economically stable society, an assimilated society, and contributors and people of contributors to the community. And what he wrote was that this narrative could actually be written, but has never been written in an alternative setting. That the history of German Jewry was always a history of migration from the East, of severe poverty, and of, in a way, resilience against all odds. And in this, he wrote that in this yet to be written history, the ZVST is somehow the yet unsung hero. And to us, of course, we didn't write that's of course an outside perspective, but to us this was a very interesting perspective into what kind of role the organization actually played throughout German Jewish history, that also due to the horrors of the Shoah could never be portrayed in that sense. And this is one of the key learnings that we also had from this 100th year anniversary. And today, as I said, you will hear more about the situation of the ZWST and the major tasks and challenges of the ZWST today from Aaron Schuster tomorrow. But I would say that to this concept that was embodied by personalities like Berta Pappenheim, the idea of help to self-help, is something that nowadays in social work, especially in social work with marginalized communities, we call empowerment. It's something that we know in these settings nowadays, but before it could have, or in a way, this kind of concept has ever-changing names. But what was the Jewish guiding principle to this organization was always doing social work by the principle of Zedaka, and that remains relevant until today. Thank you
very much. So thank you. That was very interesting, and I was trying to think. I know the stories about how. Firstly, I've read about how the leadership of Leo Baeck and others stayed through the Nazi era, which is really amazing, the things they did. But I was struck by the fact that on the one hand, and this will maybe move us to the second lecture, on the one hand, the way the organization really against all odds re-established itself and became such a vibrant organization today in Germany. So that's one aspect of the legacy, and perhaps this idea of Zedaka in the way in its guiding principles. On the other hand, we have another legacy of Jewish social work and Jewish welfare that took a very different form, and that was the Jewish welfare and Jewish social work that came to Palestine and developed into social work here, and we will hear in the next lecture about that legacy, which I think was very different, and to many ways I think this notion of tzedakah I don't think was very strong, ever very strong in the Palestine context, which is perhaps interesting to think about.